here in Verbier for the Verbier Art Summit, and this year the focus is on resources. What does it mean to use resources in the land, in the landscape, and what does it mean to question the use of resources within the cultural landscape? So I'm here with Andrea. So Andrea, maybe you can talk a bit about sort of the way in which you've focused on specific groups in a way, and sort of how climate action has been significant within their landscape or within their socioeconomic lived reality.
Back in the 90s, I discovered that there was a tree sitter trying to save a tree from urban sprawl. It was a 400-year-old oak tree. It's like as old as the United States. And that really kind of introduced me to a lot of these ideas. So the subject of climate change became an issue for me ever. I feel like I was really lucky to get to be a part of. I went to Standing Rock. Standing Rock was like 3 years ago, but it was like this major call to the world to really become, water protectors and to protect the land through really an indigenous voice. And so Standing Rock was, basically there was a series of pipelines being dug under the Missouri River right next to the Standing Rock Reservation. There are several tribes in South Dakota, and they kind of all came together at Standing Rock. And it was the largest action I've ever been a part of. It was the middle of winter. And there were 15,000 people all living in tents, and the community, the Standing Rock tribe, was figuring out how to feed everyone, how everyone could get along. Just the way it functioned was completely alternative to anything I'd ever experienced in my life. So at that point, there was one young woman who, she was a girl. She was 12, and she was this very lovely, articulate spokesperson for Standing Rock. And Standing Rock didn't end. I didn't make anything while I was there. I just experienced it. But Standing Rock still continues to grow for me, the experience, because I gain more and more friends and knowledge. But over time, I've become really close to that young woman now. She's 16, Tokata Iron Eyes. In Lakota, her name means future. So I think she is very much she represents hope for me. Mm-hmm. There's this idea of eco-grief. Have you heard about this?
Yes.
I've been reading a lot about eco-grief, and I feel like I've been experiencing it for years. When I realized that 400-year-old tree was going to be cut down, that was like eco-grief to me. And I think I kind of follow activists around and ask if I can kind of document them and tell their stories and work with them to kind of find hope within that grief.
And your work, on the one hand, you've had a sort of documentary angle. You've really focused on these individuals and given them space and voice and presence and tried to kind of tell their story. But at the same time, you've also worked on projects that are, I suppose, a more perhaps not necessarily abstracted, but your recent
or
neon
more
works,
traditional,
traditional art forms, but also then thinking within your practice holistically about how you're also working with resources, right?
Right. So I've been working for years with kind of making these almost like canvases, but they're made out of recycled, all the cardboard I get in the mail and everyone else around me. And they're just layered, to make these kind of with acrylic to make these kind of really thick, beautiful, I think, surfaces to then make these empowered women illustrations on. So it's very eco-feminist, I guess you would say. It's a monumental field that I didn't even realize, and I think I was afraid to study it because I think there were certain prejudices about it when I was in school in the 90s, and I was afraid that if I talked about those things, I wouldn't be taken legitimately because I think it had been undermined as some sort of kind of new age, kind of spirituality not to be taken seriously.
You could say almost the entire, anything to do with ecology. One of the things that I think is important to understand in our conversations here is, this conversation, as you say, has been going on since the late 60s. It's not, this is not a new, certainly I recall being at school in the 70s and we were incredibly aware of the disappearance of animal species, of the pollution of the water, of, and yet it was always pushed into a kind of, I don't know, subcategory of being a hippie.
I think that's what's really exciting too, to see this movement that we have so many indigenous youth leaders who are taking over this movement, right? Because their people are the first affected by this climate emergency.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm kind of like reconsidering things that I was almost afraid to consider in my own practice. So the text in those neon pieces come from some of these women from the 70s and 80s. But I was like looking at Judy. I was looking at Judy Berry and reading about her, and Earth First used this term, resist, reuse, restore. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I can't make these neons because I'm not doing any of that. And so I was like, I work with this amazing neon fabricator who's this incredible Buddhist environmentalist. And I was like, is it possible to make these entirely out of recycled and reused materials? And he's been saving materials, and he found reused materials from another neon person, and we're just like been collecting all of this
Which
stuff.
is, I mean, I think that's so pertinent to this conversation, because unless you ask that question, is it possible? Can we do it like that? People.
And I was so afraid to ask it. I wrote that question to him at like 3 a.m. because I couldn't sleep. And then he was thrilled to do it, but I don't think we asked these questions.
No. Why? We were talking about crates yesterday. I mean, why are we not recycling crates? I mean, all of the things that affect our industry.
Like, we have to do more of this, right?
Yeah.
Also, like, I mean, it's so controversial to buy carbon credits, but sometimes with the lighting pieces, I feel like, I do it. Mm-hmm. But like, to even ask, and it always ends up not being very much money, but to even ask or require that of our institutions becomes an issue. Yeah. And I think like a summit like this can help us build that more into the normality of how we function.
And feeling a collective sense of strength. But I think one that has always been one of the problems of your own, the inadequacy or potential non-impact of a personal position and a personal action, and then how do we institutionalize this in some way? And you as artists, requiring that almost, it's like that's your rider,
But it's hard. It's
those
scary.
of us who work in institutions to think about, how do we question each of these things that we take for granted?
Yeah. I mean, there's more. I hope we get to some of that at this summit, like pragmatic solutions, simple solutions that can help.
Yeah.